Welcome to Mythril Mythology, where today we delve into the shadowed corners of Middle-earth, exploring stories that chill the heart and linger in memory. From cursed marshlands to haunted fortresses, Middle-earth has its share of dark legends. Whispers of ancient battles, spirits bound to cursed grounds, and horrors hidden in mist and shadow. These tales remind us that even in the world of heroes, darkness lies waiting. It was a desolate and eerie night when Alden, a ranger from the north, found himself at the edge of the dead marshes. He had journeyed south, following whispered rumors of a relic lost in the days of the Great War, a time when the elves, men, and orcs clashed upon these very grounds. The tales warned of strange lights, ghostly whispers, and faces in the water, but the promise of a priceless relic drew Alden forward. As he stepped into the marshes, a damp, cold mist clung to him, chilling him to the bone. The air smelled faintly of decay, of earth that hadn't seen the light in ages. Each step seemed to echo, a soft squelch that broke the suffocating silence. He saw the strange lights almost immediately, small, wavering flames floating in the distance, bobbing as if they were lanterns held by unseen hands. They cast a sickly glow over the pools of stagnant water. "Just tricks of the light," he muttered to himself. But even he didn't believe it. The light seemed to beckon, drifting slowly further into the marsh. As Alden continued, a whisper brushed against his ears, faint at first, but growing louder, like a murmur carried by the breeze. He halted, scanning the dark, shadowy landscape around him, but there was no one to be seen. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw a face, a woman's face, pale and mournful, just beneath the water's surface. He stumbled back, his heart racing. The face was not alone. Other faces began to appear, one by one, within the water. Some were men, others elves, their eyes wide with grief or fear, lips parted in silent pleas. The faces seemed to watch him, following his every move. "Turn back," a voice whispered from somewhere deep in the marsh. It was soft, almost gentle, but layered with centuries of sorrow. Alden spun around, searching for the source, but saw only the dim glow of the ghostly lights. Desperate to escape their gaze, Alden moved faster, skirting the edges of the pools. But no matter how quickly he tried to walk, the lights kept pace, dancing on the edges of his vision, taunting him. The whispering voices grew louder, overlapping, creating a cacophony of pleas and warnings that clawed at his sanity. "Who are you?" Alden cried into the mist. His voice came back to him, hollow and lost, as if the marsh itself swallowed his words. He stumbled forward, his footing unsteady, and fell to his knees before one of the pools. Peering into its depths, he saw a great battlefield unfold within the murky water. There were men and elves clad in armor, their swords flashing as they fought a mass of orcs. The scene flickered like an old memory, the details blurred yet vivid in its horror. He could hear the clash of swords, the shouts of warriors, the screams of the dying. And then suddenly, he felt a chill at his side. He looked down and saw a figure standing next to him, though he hadn't heard anyone approach. It was an elf, his armor tarnished, his face pale and gaunt. The elf's eyes, were fixed on the battle below, an expression of sorrow etched across his face. "They do not rest," the elf whispered, his voice as hollow as the faces in the water. "We are bound to this place, bound by the curse of betrayal." Alden tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. The elf turned his hollow gaze to him, his eyes filled with an emptiness that made Alden's blood run cold. "The candles lure those who are curious," the elf continued. "Draw them in, just as you were drawn, and once they are here, they do not leave." Alden's heart pounded as he realized the full extent of his danger. His fingers trembled as he tried to stand, but his legs felt heavy, as though they were rooted to the earth. The voices around him grew louder, echoing the same words over and over. In a moment of clarity, Alden remembered an ancient song of Earendil, the Mariner, a tune that he had learned in his youth. He began to sing, his voice shaky but growing stronger with each word. The song seemed to cut through the voices, piercing the darkness like a ray of light. As he sang, the faces in the water began to fade, their features softening, their eyes closing as if finding peace at last. The elf beside him gave a nod of gratitude, his form dissolving into mist. The lights began to recede, drifting back into the depths of the marsh, and the whispers died away, leaving only the quiet rustle of the wind. With a last look at the pool, Alden backed away, heart still pounding, but his mind clear. He returned to the edge of the marsh, never once looking back. And though he left the dead marshes that night, he knew that the faces and the whispers would stay with him, haunting his dreams for years to come. Those who fell in the great battles were not truly gone. They lingered bound to the marsh, trapped between life and death for eternity. The ruins of Weathertop, or Amon's Soul, rise starkly against the darkening sky, a jagged remnant of ancient battles and shattered hopes. Once it had been a proud tower, a place of strength, where the kings of old gathered to watch over the lands. But all that remains now is a broken stone, scattered across the hilltop, and the haunting memories that linger in its shadows. The tale begins with Mardil, a treasure seeker from the north, a man driven by curiosity and greed. He had heard rumors of a lost relic buried beneath the ruins of Weathertop, a piece of the past that would fetch a handsome price among those who prized relics of ancient Numenor. Ignoring the warnings of locals, who spoke of dark spirits and cursed ground, Mardil made the climb to the top of Weathertop one cold, moonless night. As he reached the summit, a bitter wind howled through the broken stones, and the world around him seemed to grow still. The vast plains below stretched endlessly into the darkness, a sea of shadows under the faint starlight. He set to work, carefully digging into the earth, convinced that some treasure lay hidden just beneath the surface. His hands were numb from the cold, but he pressed on, lost in the thrill of discovery. Then, as he was about to lift another stone, a sudden chill ran down his spine. He paused, his hand frozen midair, as he felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The silence around him deepened, pressing against his ears, and in that silence, he heard a sound. A faint, rasping whisper, as if someone were breathing right behind him. Heart pounding, Mardil turned, but there was no one there. Only the empty darkness stretched around him, and yet he felt that he was no longer alone. Shadows began to gather, pulling together in the dim light, forming a shape, a figure cloaked in black, its form faint but unmistakable. The figure moved closer, its face hidden beneath a dark hood. The air grew cold, and Mardil found himself rooted to the spot, unable to look away. The figure reached out, and its hand, pale and skeletal, extended toward him, fingers grasping at the air. As it drew near, Mardil heard the faintest of whispers, words spoken in a language he did not understand. The voice was low and haunting, carrying a sorrow that felt as old as the stones beneath his feet. And then, in an instant, he saw it, a vision of fire and chaos, of a battle long past, when the tower of Amon's soul fell to the ring race. He saw men and elves fighting side by side, their faces twisted in fear as the dark figures closed in, their weapons useless against the Wraith's shadows. The Wraith's hand hovered inches from his face, and Mardil felt his strength begin to drain, his vision blurring as if he were slipping into a deep sleep. The Wraith whispered again, its voice softer now, pleading, as if begging him to understand its sorrow, its eternal grief bound to the ruins of Weathertop. With a last desperate effort, Mardil broke free from his paralysis and stumbled back, scrambling to his feet. His eyes fell upon the broken stone he had moved, and he saw it then, a small, tarnished relic glinting faintly in the moonlight, half buried in the earth. But the Wraith stepped forward, its presence pressing down on him, urging him to abandon his prize. Terrified, Mardil took a step back, his gaze lingering on the relic for a moment longer. The Wraith loomed closer, filling his vision, and he knew that if he stayed a moment longer, he would be lost forever. With a final reluctant glance at the relic, he turned and fled, stumbling down the hillside as the shadows of Weathertop watched him go. As he reached the foot of the hill, breathless and trembling, Mardil dared to look back. The ruin loomed above him, silent and still, as if nothing had happened. Yet, he could still feel the Wraith's presence, the sorrow and despair that lingered on the winds that swept over the hill. He never returned to Weathertop, and he never spoke of what he had seen, but he would carry the memory of that night with him always, the night he had glimpsed the ghost of Amon's soul, the Wraith bound to his ancient ruins, watching over the lost relic and waiting, forever waiting, for the battle that would never end. Minas Morgul was once a city of light, known as Minas Ithil, the Tower of the Moon. But that was long ago, in an age before the shadow claimed it. Now it is a city of death, ruled by dark sorcery, a stronghold for the Witch King of Angmar. Legends say that on certain nights the bells of Minas Ithil can still be heard, faint chimes carried by the winds, a reminder of the tower's lost beauty. Our story follows Therendor, a young soldier of Gondor with more bravery than wisdom, who had heard whispers of the tower's lost bells. Driven by curiosity and perhaps a measure of pride, he believed himself clever enough to scout the Morgul Vale undetected. He had slipped away from his company's encampment, against orders, to see the legendary tower with his own eyes. Therendor crept silently into the vale, shrouded by night, careful to stay low and out of sight. The city loomed in the distance, its spires glowing with a sickly green light. casting long shadows across the barren landscape. As he drew closer, a chill settled over him, more intense than any cold he'd known. The silence was complete, almost oppressive, broken only by the faint echo of a bell, a sound both distant and haunting. Encouraged by the ghostly chime, he moved forward, inching closer to the city's edge. A narrow path led to an ancient wall where he found an overlook, giving him a clear view of the citadel. The greenish light seemed to pulse, as though the city itself were alive, breathing with an unnatural energy. From here, he could see the high towers, the arched windows, and the shadows that fitted in and out of the eerie glow. Another bell sounded, closer this time, and he froze. The chime seemed to resonate through his bones, a sound of such piercing sorrow that it nearly broke his resolve. He could almost see the city as it had been in its days of glory, a shining beacon of hope against the darkness. But that vision faded, replaced by the twisted fortress before him. Suddenly, he felt a presence, a heavy, dark sensation pressing down on him, filling the air with dread. His instincts screamed at him to flee, yet he was unable to move, as though rooted to the spot. The bells chimed again, louder and deeper, and with each strike, a shadow drew closer, solidifying before him. A figure emerged from the darkness, draped in tattered silver robes. Its face was pale, hollow-eyed, the remnants of a once proud Gondorian guard. The spirit raised a hand in a gesture of warning, its empty eyes locking with Therendor's. What are you?" Therendor whispered, his voice shaking. The spirit spoke in a voice that seemed to echo from another age. "I am bound here, as are all who fell to the shadow. We who failed to defend Minas Ithil must now guard Minas Morgul in death." The ghostly figure reached toward him, its hand passing through his chest. An unbearable cold filled him, like ice spreading through his veins. Visions flooded his mind of the tower's fall, of brave men and women who had died defending it, their faces twisted in terror as the Witch King's forces overtook the city. Therendor stumbled back, clutching his chest, but the spirit's touch remained, an icy grip that would not release him. He gasped for breath, feeling the life draining from his body, as though the spirit were absorbing his strength, his very essence. "You must go," the spirit rasped, though its eyes held a sorrowful gaze, "before the Witch King claims you as his own." But it was too late. Therendor's vision dimmed, the world around him fading into shadow. He tried to turn, to flee, but his legs refused to obey. The silent bells chimed again, and with each toll, he felt himself slipping away, his body growing cold, his mind falling into a fog. With one final effort, he looked up at the tower, its sickly green light casting shadows across his face. In that moment, he knew he would not leave the Vale. He would become yet another shade bound to the tower, another ghost forever wandering the ruins, warning others in vain. As his last breath escaped his lips, the valley grew silent once more, save for the faint, mournful chime of the bells. And when his comrades searched for him the next day, they found no trace of Therendor, only his sword, lying cold and untouched on the path leading to Minas Morgul. Those who passed through the vale afterward swore that, on certain nights, they could see a figure among the silent watchers, a lost soul forever bound to the cursed city. The Barrow-downs are an eerie, mist-shrouded land where the ancient dead lie in silence, their spirits bound to the mounds that cover their graves. Few dare to venture here, for the Barrow-wights, ghostly beings bound to guard the treasure in ancient bones buried within the hills, are said to capture the unwary, never to release them. Our tale begins with Elwyn, a lone traveler journeying south toward Bree, who, caught in a sudden storm, seeks refuge among the hills. The rain falls in sheets as she makes her way through the Barrow-downs, the mist swirling thick around her, obscuring her vision. She stumbles upon a hollow that seems to offer shelter and steps inside, grateful to be out of the biting wind. But as she settles in, her heart begins to race. The air feels heavy, filled with an ancient, suffocating chill, as though the very earth itself is washing her. Moments pass, and she hears a faint sound, a rustling like fabric brushing against stone. She looks around, but sees only shadows flickering in the dim light. Still, she feels an oppressive presence growing, filling the hollow with a sense of dread that prickles along her skin. Then, without warning, the ground shifts beneath her, and she gasps as a skeletal hand rises from the earth. Her scream is caught in her throat as the rest of the figure emerges, draped in the tattered remains of armor, eyes glowing with a cold, unnatural light. The Barrow-wight stands before her, a being of shadow and bone, ancient beyond reckoning, its hollow voice echoing in the confined space. "You dare to disturb the rest of the kings of old?" It hisses, each word dripping with malice. Elwyn stammers, backing against the stone wall, her heart pounding as she tries to find a way out. But the wight raises its hand, and she feels an invisible force holding her in place, freezing her limbs. The creature's voice grows softer, almost mournful. "We are bound to this land by betrayal and blood," it whispers. "Ours is a curse that knows no end, and now you shall join us in our eternal vigil." The mist thickens around her, and Elwyn feels herself being pulled forward, drawn toward the wight as though by some invisible chain. She struggles, but her body feels numb, her strength slipping away with each passing moment. She realizes, in that horrifying instant, that the wight intends to bury her alive, to trap her within the barrow as it has done to countless others, a fate from which there is no escape. Desperation claws at her mind, and she remembers an old incantation, sung by wandering bards, a verse about Tom Bombadil, a spirit who roams the wild lands. With the last of her fading strength, she begins to sing, her voice trembling but clear. The wight falters, its grip loosening as her song fills the hollow. "Old Tom Bombadil, merry fellow, bright blue his jacket is, and his boots are yellow." The wight shrinks back, hissing as though burned, the spell broken by her voice. The mist begins to recede, and the oppressive force holding her in place finally releases her. She stumbles out of the hollow, gasping for air, her heart racing as she scrambles down the hillside, away from the cursed mounds. But as she flees, she hears the Wight's parting whisper, carried on the wind.
You may escape today, mortal, but the Barrow-downs claim all in time.
She reaches the edge of the downs as dawn breaks, the cursed hills fading into the distance behind her. Though she is free, the memory of that night never leaves her, and she carries the knowledge of what waits in the Barrow-downs for the rest of her days. In the southern reaches of Mirkwood, Dol Guldur sits as a blight upon the land, its very presence corrupting the forest around it. Rumors among the wood elves tell of twisted creatures, ghostly wails, and a darkness so deep that no starlight can pierce it. Some say that Sauron's influence left something behind, an echo of his malice that clings to Dol Guldur, drawing souls toward it, never to return. Ithilwyn, a young wood elf and daring scout, had always been drawn to the places her kin avoided. She'd explored the shadowed caves and crept near abandoned fortresses, but none of her adventures had prepared her for the feeling that seeped into her bones as she entered the forest near Dol Guldur. A chill clung to the air, thick and unrelenting, as if the fortress's darkness had infected the woods around it. Trees twisted grotesquely overhead, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching down toward her. Night had fallen, and a heavy fog rose from the ground, swirling around Ithilwyn's feet, making it difficult to see where the path ended and the ruins began. She took careful steps, her keen elvish eyes able to make out faint, distorted shapes in the distance. Stone archways lay broken, remnants of Dol Guldur's former might. Scattered like the bones of some ancient beast, the air grew thick with decay and age, the smell of damp stone and something else, something rancid. Then she heard it, a faint whisper, drifting on the wind, a voice so soft it was almost swallowed by the oppressive silence.
Welcome, Ithilwyn.
She froze, her heart pounding. She had told no one of her journey, and yet the voice knew her name. She called out, her voice barely audible against the weight of the darkness. "Who's there?" But there was no reply, only the lingering echo of her name, fading into the silence. As she stepped forward, her instincts told her to turn back, to run, but her curiosity won over her fear. She had come to understand the mysteries of Dol Guldur, and some part of her believed that the fortress called to her, beckoning her into its depths. The path twisted, leading her to an arched doorway, shrouded in shadows. She hesitated, feeling a wave of dread wash over her, but she pressed on. The silence within the fortress was almost painful, an unnatural void that pressed against her ears, as if the very stones were holding their breath. As she moved deeper into the ruins, she caught glimpses of figures out of the corner of her eye, shadows flitting across the walls, following her every step. Her breath quickened, and she turned, trying to catch them, but each time she was met with only emptiness. Then she saw him, a tall, gaunt figure in dark robes, his face obscured by a hood, standing just beyond her reach. She couldn't tell if he was real or merely a shadow, but his voice was unmistakable, dripping with malice and sorrow.
"You are lost, child," he murmured, his voice reverberating through the empty halls.
I am not lost, she replied, though her voice trembled.
You are bound, he whispered, stepping closer. As I am bound, as all who enter this place are bound.
Ithilwyn tried to turn, but her legs felt heavy, as if roots had grown from the stone floor, wrapping around her ankles, holding her in place. Panic rose within her as the figure reached out, his hand passing through her chest. A searing pain spread from where he touched, as though her very essence was being torn from her body. Memories flooded her mind, images of her kin, of Mirkwood, of sunlight filtering through leaves. But they grew dimmer, swallowed by an endless cold darkness. The shadow leaned closer, his breath like frost against her skin.
You sought to understand, he whispered. Now you will. Forever.
The room around her spun, and Ithilwyn collapsed to the ground, her vision blurring. She felt herself slipping, her body going numb, her senses fading one by one until only darkness remained. In her final moments, she realized the truth. Dol Guldur did not just haunt the living, it consumed them, binding their souls to its walls, feeding on their fear, their memories, their very beings, until all that remained were echoes. The last sound she heard was the low, rumbling voice of the fortress itself, whispering her name one last time as her soul was absorbed into its eternal shadow. When morning came, her kin searched the woods for her, but found only her cloak, abandoned at the edge of the fortress, as if Dol Guldur itself had swallowed her whole. And deep within the fortress, among the other restless spirits, a new voice joined the whispers, a voice that would warn, plead, and linger, forever lost within the hill of sorcery. These tales are woven into the tapestry of Middle-earth, lurking at hidden places in the memories of the lost. Tolkien's world is filled not only with light, but with shadows that deepen the mystery and beauty of his creation. Thank you for joining us on this dark journey through Mithril mythology. If you'd like to hear more tales of Middle-earth, from the mysterious to the heroic, be sure to subscribe and leave a comment about which story left you haunted.